So consciousness has to limit itself into singular forms to have this experience you and I are having. And the nervous system is the medium through which consciousness limits itself. Think about a nervous system like a funnel. A third density nervous system looks like this, and a fourth density nervous system looks like that. I experienced a 2-week period of incredible oneness and expansiveness into reality, where I just saw the true nature of reality beyond the separate self of there's just one being here. And it's just knowing itself in an infinite variety of forms. That state of consciousness is absolutely real, because I got to live in it for 2 full weeks. Nobody can tell me that state of consciousness wasn't real. It was the most real thing I'd ever experienced. The greatest benefit that you can offer the world to help the world is your own spiritual growth.
The episode you're about to watch has been republished. My podcast channel reaches a lot more people now, and there's certain episodes that have slipped under the radar, and I wanted to bring them up for your attention because I truly feel they are worth listening to. So please be sure to let me know what you think of this episode in the comments below. And of course, let's continue to connect. Let me know where you are in the world and where you're listening and tuning in from. I love reading it. It's amazing, isn't it, that we can do this? And the other thing I want to say as well is find out where we are if you want to put your spiritual boots on and come and join us at one of our 5-day retreats or 1-day events around the world. Links are below as well if you want to find out more what we're up to. Much love from me. Enjoy. Aaron, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Guy. It's my pleasure to be here.
I always ask when starting off on the podcast, and I'm always fascinated, if you were at an intimate dinner party and you sat next to a stranger and they ask you what you did for a living right now, what would you say?
Man, that's always such a weird question to answer because I don't really know how to answer it. The easy answer would just be to tell people I'm a spiritual teacher, but I don't like that term. So I usually say something like, "Oh, I do YouTube. I have some classes on meditation and mindfulness and things like that," and I just kind of leave it there, and then see if they poke or prod more than that.
What is the general response? Are people interested? I'm always conscious of speaking anything in terms of anything around that work, and I was actually terrified of 3, 4, 5 years ago maybe. I was almost like in the closet about it, and
Mm-hmm.
then as you sort of talk about it more, you realize the only people that matter are the ones that want to listen, and then you kind of move on. But what do you find the general responses with yourself?
People are very interested, for sure. They typically will ask like, well, what kind of classes do you teach? What are your classes about? And if it's not somebody who has, to my understanding or knowledge, any like spiritual background, I'll usually say something like, well, I teach people how to be aware of themselves, how to be more aware of their mind and their thinking patterns, and to stop suffering. And they'll be, oh, that's really great. So I can get around the spiritual lingo a bit that way.
Yeah. I'm fascinated as well by your upbringing, your journey. So feel free to share a little bit from the story, because like we were saying off air, it couldn't be more opposite to my upbringing and journey. And, and everything leads to, we end up on our paths and we go our way, especially as we start to follow our passion, our heart, and what we want to deliver in the world, and make a difference. So can we start there? Can you take us back to what happened with you? And at what point did you start to lean into this work that you now teach?
So I'm guessing that means you didn't grow up religious at all?
Not at all. Not at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I certainly did. I grew up as a pastor's kid in like evangelical Christianity and was a super devout Christian, always loved God, loved Jesus, wanted to do what was right and wanted to be Christ-like. But it was sort of my love and passion for Jesus that led me to a point at 23 years old where I had gone to college, got my degree in music and theology to be a worship pastor. And I'd sort of suddenly realized I don't believe in this version of God anymore. And like, how do I reconcile that now that I'm a full-time pastor? So I had to sort of quit my job and like blow my life up and move back to Oklahoma at the time where I went to school and just like try to reinvent myself and rediscover what I believed about God and reality. Because one thing I was certain of at that age was the Christian monolithic version of God I was presented is most definitely does not exist. And that's all I knew for certain. But beyond that, it was like, well, I'm open to like any other conception of the divine. So I kind of threw myself into Eastern traditions, like Buddhism and Hinduism, especially, and started reading a lot of non-duality and Enlightenment teachers that we're familiar with in the West, like Alan Watts, Eckhart Tolle, and was on a path for a while, learning about that. Was really passionate about it, but it was very new to my understanding from growing up as a Christian. And I had gotten married at 23, did the Christian thing where you stay celibate and get married as young as possible and stuff. And then when I left my religion, my wife at that time and I just kind of didn't grow together that way. So I had to get divorced at 26, move back to California, move in with my parents who are still Christian and don't like my new beliefs. And no friends, like all my Christian friends thought I was a heretic now. So I had to kind of start my life over. And that caused me to go into a really deep kind of dark night of the soul where I had no basis of belief about reality anymore, no faith to cling to, no friends. All my friends kind of hated me for being a heretic, for denouncing Christianity. Most of my family did the same thing, except for my parents and sister. Like, to us, you're a heretic. We don't want to talk to you anymore. So I was dealing with a lot, and my divorce, of course, a lot of different catalysts at the same time. And it was this really severe depression that I was trying to work through that pushed me to a place of intense spiritual seeking. And so that led me to a pretty, dramatic and sudden spiritual awakening experience at about 27.
Wow. I definitely want to dive into that in a minute as well, your experience. What was it like then between that age of up to 23? Because I remember, I think I heard yesterday or the day before researching your work, Aaron, that you hadn't even smelt alcohol or touched alcohol until you were 21. Mm-hmm. And yeah, again, that's very different to me. My religion was rugby and I was very good at drinking Guinness, and that was my culture growing up in the valleys of Wales.
So you did grow up religious.
And yeah, exactly. I broke out of that at 20. That was me wanting to try and find myself, which took a much, much longer time. So I'm interested, what's it like growing up in that infrastructure at that age? Because you did speak of that you were following the steps and all you wanted to do was continue to do the work. So what was the tipping point then as well to wanting to break out of it? Was it all theoretical at that stage? Because I've read many books, I've read many things, and I kind of intellectualized it, but I didn't really get it.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't theoretical for me. So I grew up in a really amazing church my parents had, where we were experiencing a lot of what we call supernatural in our church, where we had these revival services, and you get like 500 people worshiping God with all their heart and dancing and all kinds of fun, crazy stuff. And then we would go into these healing services, and I watched people, blind eyes open, deaf ears open, cancerous tumors dissolving, rheumatoid arthritis, heart disease, diabetes, you name it, the whole gambit, man. And this was like a normal part of my life at that age, was seeing these supernatural, miracles. And of course, that also reinforced, what I believe about God must be true because there's miracles happening here. And really all that this is, whether it's an evangelical Christianity or any other denomination, is that many spiritual traditions sort of unknowingly bump up against these spiritual laws of the universe, of how all minds are joined, energies connected, collective consciousness and stuff like that. And supernatural things can happen. But we didn't understand why they were happening because, some people we pray for would get healed instantaneously. Other people wouldn't get healed. And so we just said, well, I guess, God decided to heal that person and not heal that person for some reason. So we didn't understand the part that we had to play really in the equation. But, that's what was normal to me as a kid. And so I grew up, hearing my dad preach about God is love, God is mercy, God is forgiveness, God loves everyone. We're all God's children. And so we didn't talk about the dogmatic stuff very much. Who's going to hell? the rapture's coming soon and blah, blah, blah. It was really just like the golden nuggets from Christianity, you know? And so when I got my first job at a church at 23, it was a very fundamentalist church that was not spirit filled at all, like my dad's church was. It was very like dead. Nobody even really sang during the worship. Like everyone was just standing there stoically and like bored to death looking. And so it was a really different environment. And I really didn't like it because it was so foreign to me. It's like, don't you guys love God? Don't you want to worship God? Like, what's the deal here? And they started teaching stuff, you know, the senior pastor started teaching stuff that really was like grating on me, on my spirit to hear, like women being inferior to men. And, you know, everyone who doesn't believe what we believe are going to burn in hell. And it's up to us to go save them from this wrathful God who's going to send them to hell. And it forced me into a corner pretty quickly to determine, like, okay, do I believe in this version of God or not? And the answer was a resounding no. Like, I don't know who you're talking about. I don't know this Jesus you talk about on Sundays, who is like a, you know, like Rambo Jesus coming back again one day to slay his enemies and take all the Christians to heaven. It's like, this is really weird and Game of Thronesy. Like, I don't know that Jesus. I know a Jesus who said, feed the poor, you know, take in the widow, the orphan, visit the prisoner. When you did not do it to the least of these, you didn't do it to me. A very different version of Jesus than I was hearing preached. And so I said, I have to be true to the Jesus I know in my heart, which is a Jesus of love and forgiveness who doesn't want to do harm to anybody or see any differences in anyone. And so I quit my job, much to the chagrin of my pastor at the time. I sort of just gotten hired and then had this huge like identity crisis. So then I moved back to Oklahoma, and then the seeking journey kind of began from there.
Wow. And wow. So that must have been a huge courageous step for you then, like you say, to come to that conclusion and then to say you're going to walk away from it. Because I feel many of us in our lives have those identity crises, regardless of where they're at or where they're hers, or am I on purpose? What is going on in my relationship? So to be able to do that at a young age, did you think about it? Was it freeing? Was it simple? Or at that point you were like, wow, I realize here, if I move on, there's no going back kind of thing?
Yeah, it was extremely terrifying at that age because your whole security blanket is your religion. And, oh, everyone else here believes what I believe. So that's my sense of security in life. You know, I have certainty that I'm going to heaven when I die because everyone else does too. So it's like, am I willing to abandon all of that certainty that these people give me in this religion? And then am I willing to know that all my friends, probably most of my family, are going to denounce me as a heretic if I tell them what I really believe? So like, it was probably a 3 or 4 year journey before I finally pulled the plug. Because even before I got that job, I'd gone to college at Oral Roberts University in Oklahoma and was already kind of red pilled out of religion then, and was like, man, I got to figure out what I believe, because so much of what is being taught at this school, I definitely don't believe. And so the church I worked at was kind of the last straw that broke the camel's back. And it was really just the amount of time it took to gather the courage to leave and understand, like, okay, I'm about to blow up my whole life. That's fine. I'll rebuild it at some point. It may take a few years, but you know, life will go on. But it was really the internal conflict of getting up every day, hearing the same things over and over that I totally disagreed with and did not resonate in my heart with. And that internal conflict became so insufferable that I was like, whatever price I have to pay to get out of here, you know, I'm willing to pay.
Yeah, no, got it. And then that led you to, you mentioned two things earlier, the dark night of the soul, your own dark night of the soul, and your own spiritual awakening. Can you touch on those? And I'm always fascinated as well that, do you need to have a dark night of a soul to have a spiritual awakening?
That's a good question. You know, I never want to give a unilateral answer to anything, but it almost feels like you do, just because the nature of the universe, right, is we need polarity to understand anything. So we can't really know the light until we've seen the darkness, because then the darkness gives meaning to the light. So I'm certain that there's been people who've had spiritual awakenings who maybe didn't have a dark night of the soul, but I think it's probably very rare, like the exception. And for me, it was the dark night of the soul of, is God real? Is there life after death? Is there meaning to my existence? Those were the really like existential questions that I wanted answers for, but I didn't want to fool myself and just like pat myself on the back with some nice answer and say, oh yeah, there's meaning, don't worry. It was like, no, I need to know what's true, even if the truth is terrifying. As long as I know what's true, I'll be happy, or at least I can die in peace or something, right? And I sort of had to question my own sanity too for a while, because I'd had such a deep and intimate relationship with the divine as a Christian. I would talk to God. I experienced miracles and the supernatural all the time. And so when I deconstructed the, monolithic, monotheistic version of God, it was like, who have I been talking to this whole time? Whose love have I been feeling? What miracles have been manifesting? Like, from what power did those things come from? And that's why I think I found answers so quickly, is that for the first time, I wasn't sticking to a rigid viewpoint of something, but it was like, I just want to know what's true, man. I don't care what it is. I don't care if it goes against everything I believed before. And when you come to the universe with that kind of humility, you get answers pretty quick. So the depression was this ongoing feeling of hopelessness. And, I think what happens as you're about to really awaken is that the ego will throw everything plus the kitchen sink at you to try to get you to identify again. But I'd been listening to Enlightenment teachings for like 3 or 4 years solid. And so I understood like there is no separate self. The ego is an illusion, but I had no experience of it. And I was still fully identified as the body, as the person. So the ego was doing whatever it could to keep me in identification with it. And it was this, life is hopeless, just end yourself. There's no reason to be here. What's the purpose of it all? And like deep down, I knew these thoughts were lies. But you know how it is when you're suffering from depression like that, it just seems to be so real. It feels so real. And you're just giving reality to those ideas. So it was this part of me that knew like these horrible thoughts are not based in truth, that I think led me to the awakening. Because I think if I had given into them fully and conceded to them, universe might have honored that free will and just let me terminate the incarnation or whatever. But it was like, no, there's something in me that knows there's a higher truth than this, that there's no way that this is the ultimate truth of reality, hopelessness and meaninglessness, So what had happened was I was working at Google at the time as a personal trainer, and I would go up to this balcony above my gym on my lunch break to listen to Eckhart Tolle while I had my lunch. And I would just kind of watch the clouds and just listen to Eckhart. And it was the only time in my day where I felt like I had peace of mind and I felt some stillness and stuff. So I was going up there every day for 3 or 4 months, I think. And one particular day, for no apparent reason, I was listening to a particular lecture where Eckhart was mimicking things the ego says to us and then laughing at them. Something like, if only people would recognize how special I am, then I would truly be happy. And then he would laugh, ah, ha, 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 ha. And the audience was laughing with him. And so I started laughing, and he did like 4 or 5 of them in a row. He would pause in between and then say the next one. So I was like really laughing at this idea of, wow, that is exactly what my ego says to me every day. It's these same exact stories. And I was like, wow, it's like we all have the same ego that has the same agenda and says the same things to us. And when I had those thoughts, I sort of like laughed myself into a kind of sudden enlightenment where I gained a actual experience of these truths I had come to know conceptually, that there is no separate self. You are not the voice in your head. I gained experience of that. The way I describe it is like what I thought was me talking to myself of, I'm so depressed, I'm so sad. All of a sudden, it was a tape recorder on a loop, just playing. And there was nobody actually there saying it or believing it. I realized, oh, it's absolutely nothing. I've just been giving reality to an illusion. And so I just experienced a kind of 2-week period from that point of incredible oneness and expansiveness into reality, where I just saw the true nature of reality beyond the separate self of there's just one being here. And I am that being, and everyone's that being. And it's just knowing itself in an infinite variety of forms. And it's like the most beautiful, wonderful thing that could ever be imagined is what's happening. And so I spent 2 weeks like that until I woke up on day 14 and looked at my phone when my alarm went off. And I noticed it had been 2 weeks to the day. I'd been in this kind of samadhi state. And the first egoic thought came back online and it said, wow, it's been 2 full weeks. I wonder if I'm enlightened now. And I didn't catch that that was the ego coming back, trying to claim that state. You know, there's a person who is enlightened, right? And so I was thinking about that during the day. Oh, I wonder if I'm enlightened now. And like, is this enlightenment? And then slowly the old thoughts came back into the mind and I felt that state slipping away and I couldn't hold on to it. It was like a bar of soap or something. And it was so devastating to lose that state after 2 weeks of it absolutely unbroken, you know, floating in bliss for 2 weeks and then crashing back down into the dark night of the soul. It made the dark night even worse because now I had tasted the alternative and lost it, like being kicked out of heaven and sent back to hell again. But that was the gift that the universe gave me, that it created in me such a burning desire to return to that state again. It was like nothing else matters in my life other than this, because now I have undeniable proof, right? That state of consciousness is absolutely real because I got to live in it for 2 full weeks. Nobody can tell me that state of consciousness wasn't real. It was the most real thing I'd ever experienced. It was like I woke up from a bad dream and went, oh, I was just dreaming. It was nothing. You know, this is reality. And so that's when, you know, I started finding like A Course in Miracles, The Law of One, and universe led me to texts and teachers that gave me the ability to walk myself back into the remembrance of how to actualize and permanently reside in that state of liberation. And probably around, you know, 1.5 to 2 years after that experience is when I started making videos on YouTube. Not from a standpoint of wanting or thinking I was going to be a teacher at all. It was just like, man, I'm so passionate about this. And I've gained so much help from these understandings and these truths that surely if I make some videos, it's going to help somebody out there, you know?
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. Question I kept just jumping in while you were talking there is that when you were having that experience or before you had it, were you pushing for it? Were you seeking it? Were you just allowing? Did it come unexpectedly? Because what I see so often, and I was guilty of this as well, is you go chasing the experience, wanting to have this experience, and then that wanting is then actually allowing you to bypass everything that you need to be working with that's going on for you. Yeah. And we miss the point quite often.
Yeah, we keep putting ourselves back as a character on a journey to arrive somewhere. And that's what keeps us out of that state, because it's just what is our natural state without illusions and distractions of the mind, you know? So to answer your question, no, I was not really pushing for that at that point in my life because it still felt so far away. It felt sort of like a pipe dream, but it still was my magnificent obsession because I was suffering so much. And then listening to these, you know, teachings and books that talk about this final liberation from suffering that's possible. And it was like, wow, you know, I hope that's true, but I don't really feel like it's possible. And the experience that happened at 27 was very much a shock because I did not expect that I would have ever tasted it at that point in my life. It felt like a million miles away. So that's part of why it was such a disorienting experience. I would not have been able to explain to anybody verbally what was going on in my mind at that point because I'd never tasted it before. So, you know, teaching it wouldn't have been possible at that point. It was just like, wow, what has happened to me and why is life so wonderful all of a sudden?
Yeah, okay, fair enough. And when did you leave Google then? Was that another big moment in your life? Because when you have an experience like that, how do you then turn up for work the next day?
Oh yeah,
because that was the problem I was having. You know, it's like, oh, how, you know, how do you integrate it?
After that experience wore off and the suffering came back, man, I went up to the same seat every day, got the same meal, listened to the same Eckhart lecture. Okay, any minute now, enlightenment will dawn again. And it never did. One thing that was interesting, though, was that I learned that if I smoked cannabis, it would bring me back into that state. Like as it was starting to wear off, and I was like realizing, oh no, the old sad person's coming back, and this state of heavenly perfection is leaving me. I would smoke cannabis, and it was like fully back again while I was high. And so like for probably a month solid, I was high 24/7 at work. Like I didn't want to ever be sober because it would take me out of that state again. But that was what created the fear in the back of my mind of like, no, this state is leaving you and I'm coming back to get you. And I have a lot of vengeance, against you now for what you just did to me for those 2 weeks. It felt like I locked my ego in a broom closet or something for 2 weeks, and it finally like wiggled its way out, and it was coming for blood, and it did. It made my life even worse than it was before because it had so much more of a story to weaponize against me of like, you were given a free sample of enlightenment. You couldn't even hang on to it. You weren't worthy of it. You got kicked out because you're not enlightened enough, man. It's not for you in this life. It was just a little transient experience you had. This is your life now. It's you and me in pain and nothing else. Like that was the voice in my mind. But thankfully, again, I had glimpsed freedom from that voice. And so I kind of knew in my awareness, like this, whatever this voice is actually just very threatened about what just happened. And so it's doing what it can to convince me that I'm powerless against it and stuff. So it was really when I found A Course in Miracles that started describing the ego more that I was like, oh, this makes perfect sense. It's all based in illusions, and it just needs me to buy into those illusions to have power over me, right?
Right. And then you left Google. Is that what happened after?
Yes.
Yeah.
I left in August of 2019. I just sort of felt like my time in California was up. And
Right.
I grew up in Colorado for 4 years of my life and always kind of knew I wanted to go back there at some point. And so I just felt like it's really hard to survive in the Bay Area as a single person, first of all. And I was just getting tired of the rat race every day. So I felt a strong calling to move to Colorado. And I just went, I'm just going to follow that voice. And so I just quit my job, which was definitely scary at the time because it was a good enough paying job that I could do what I loved for a living and make a decent living out of it. And I didn't know what I was going to do in Colorado, but saved up some money, quit my job, and just drove out to Boulder and got an apartment and just started my life over. And that's when like my career sort of took off almost overnight from that point.
Yeah, there you go. I have to ask you as well, because we touched on it off air about Kundalini, and where did your interest come in for that? And you feel it was a strong part of your teachings today?
Yeah, I'm very passionate about this topic, especially with the day and age we live in. I feel like there's only two real saviors in town for humanity, which are one, psychedelics, and two, Kundalini awakening. I feel like it's going to be such a pivotal part of humanity's awakening is that as our planet is shifting like it is and the vibration, the frequency is increasing, more people's Kundalinis are going to start to pop as they seem to be doing right now. And because of that, we're going to need better and more resources to help people understand this phenomenon and how to facilitate it and ground it. So for me, it began in 2019 to 2020. I started having what I call Kundalini symptoms. And I didn't know what it was at the time, but some weird symptoms were going on. And I started researching stuff of, okay, is this an ascension symptom or what's going on? And I found, some forums on Kundalini. And I was like, oh yeah, I've heard about Kundalini awakenings, but I never really understood it. And I got really passionate about it to the point that I was reading every book I could find on the subject, read every Gopi Krishna book and so many more, and started to understand it also from a kind of law of one lens. I don't know how familiar you are with the law of one.
I mean, I've heard you speak about it and other people speak about it, but I haven't dived in fully to the teachings.
Okay. Are you familiar with the densities model at all?
It was a question that I had here with the density versus dimension as well, which I'm intrigued in. Because that'd be a great to get into the density, but also what is Kundalini, and I'm interested to know what your symptoms were as well, because I'm sure people listening today might be experiencing some of those things.
Yeah. Well, this is all going to tie in together really well.
Okay.
Because the densities will help you understand how I came to see Kundalini, and to see it from a more like metaphysical lens. It's really pretty amazing. So in the law of one, Ra, who's the entity being channeled, they're questioning Ra about this term that they use called densities. And so Ra explains how the universe is sort of a progressive sequence of the evolution of consciousness through these 7 density levels. And so the 7 densities correlate to our 7 chakras, our 7 energy centers. And so they're kind of like the chakras of the universe. You can think of it that way. And what they are is like the color wheel begins at red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. The color wheel is actually also a depiction of the way consciousness evolves and moves through stages, kind of like colors. So the first density correlates to the root chakra and is red, and that's the density of beingness, or just existing, pure existence. So consciousness spends a few billion years in space-time existing as the 5 elements: earth, water, fire, air, space. And so those 5 elements interact for billions of years, right, until planets form around stars and harden and solidify, and oceans form and land. And then once those 5 elements have made a kind of stable structure, such as a planet, then consciousness moves into the second density, which is the sacral chakra, orange ray level. And that is the density of awareness and movement in the environment. So anything that has the ability to move around and interact in some kind of intelligent way with its environment is a second density life form. So think about, microbial life is where that would have began, kind of in the oceans or whatever. And then that evolved into plants, insects, sea life, and animals. That whole spectrum is second density. So it's a really big spectrum, but you see how consciousness really levels up in how many different variables it has to deal with. In the first density, it's just the 5 elements interacting. Second density, now you're a plant in the soil. You got to put down roots and gain nutrients and grow and survive. And as an insect, as an animal, you're trying to not be eaten, and you got to reproduce. Like, so many more variables in that second density. Well, eventually consciousness makes another level up into the third density, which correlates to the solar plexus chakra, the yellow ray. And that's, as we know, the chakra where the ego is finally created. And so the third density of consciousness is the density of self-awareness, where consciousness has gained enough experience in reality that now it can actually become self-aware. And that idea of I am, I exist, is born in the mind. And so that's human beings, right? That's where humans are on that spectrum of third density. And so third density is, according to the law of one, the most challenging and difficult density level of the 7, because it's the density where the belief in separation is created. So if I exist, then I am this body, right? I'm the body is the belief. That means that I'm not you and you're not me. So you're a potential threat to my survival. You're a potential object I can acquire or possess or enslave, right? So in third density is where war and slavery and genocide and all these terrible things happen as consciousness is trying to learn and understand oneness. So third density goes on for a certain period of time, as we've seen it on our planet, until eventually consciousness increases its frequency enough to say, okay, it's true that we're all in seemingly different bodies, but it's becoming more clear that we are all of the same sort of essence or energy. We're all one in some kind of universal way. And if we treat each other like we're one with each other, and we love each other, and we work together as brothers and sisters, then wow, life gets really good really fast. And that's the fourth density of the heart chakra, which is the density of love and understanding. So back to Kundalini, we are in that position now where humanity is transitioning from the third density level to a fourth density level or planet. So we are, as we're all witnessing right now, trying to learn how to be one with each other and not be separate anymore. You know, the internet and so much technology like social media is joining humanity together, and we're kind of working out our differences. We're trying to overcome the whole enslavement game that's been played on our planet for so long. So there's a lot of big catalysts that humanity has to work through, but we are becoming a fourth density civilization where the awareness of oneness will be absolutely normal at a certain point, maybe in a few thousand years or something, but that's where we're headed. So what a Kundalini awakening is that every density level also has a corresponding energy body that has to come into activation to bring your consciousness to that density level. So the root chakra has the red ray body, the sacral chakra has the orange ray body, the solar plexus has the yellow ray body, and that's the one we're seeing right now on camera. This is our yellow ray body. And then the fourth density has the green ray body of the heart. And it's a much, much higher frequency, just like every density is. And the best way to understand what a density is if you think about a photon vibrating, and I have a photon over here that vibrates at 100 times per second. And then I have a photon on this side that vibrates 1,000,000 times per second. Well, this photon obviously has a lot more density of light than this one does, right? There's a lot more light in this container over here. And so the more light that there is in a given space, the more information there is, because light is information. And so the more information is there, the more ability consciousness has to express itself. So as I kind of walked you through the first four densities, you can see that the densities model shows you the ability consciousness has to express itself at any given stage. So that's why your dog or your cat, they're a second density creature. So they have a very obviously different state of consciousness than you do, right? They can't talk with verbal language because they're not self-aware like you are conceptually. They can't formulate words and make meaning out of them because they're a second density life form. So the consciousness at their level can't move fast enough to process that much information. So we are moving from a third to a fourth density state. And what we've traditionally called a Kundalini awakening is actually the awakening of our fourth density energy in the nervous system, coming into activation and moving up the spine towards the higher chakras. And as we know, the higher chakras are the spiritual chakras that open up spiritual awareness and things like that. So basically, when a person has cultivated a certain level of spiritual development or a profound inner desire, let's say, a passion to know truth, to know God, to pursue something they love, anything like that can spark that dormant energy to awaken. And it actually literally begins transforming the nervous system from the inside out to a fourth density level, because these energies like love and bliss and joy, they're very high vibrational frequencies that a third density nervous system just doesn't quite have the bandwidth to sustain for very long. So we may have an experience of bliss that lasts for 20 minutes, an hour, something like that. And then we sort of crash back down to our default mode network of ego consciousness. Well, that's because our nervous system literally can't process that level of energy for very long. So the nervous system has to be upgraded to increase its capacity and sort of like have the RPMs, right, to process that energy with.
So do you feel then the evolution of consciousness is the evolution of the nervous system ultimately?
Yeah, in a way it is. The way I see it is that the nervous system does not produce consciousness or conduct consciousness, but it actually limits consciousness. Because we know consciousness is one and it's universal. So it's everywhere. It's omnipresent. Everything is consciousness. So if we don't limit consciousness to some finite point, how could you ever have an experience, right? Like you could not experience the whole universe simultaneously. That wouldn't be an experience. It would be like the Om sound, Om, like that's what it would be like, right? Just too much going on at once. So consciousness has to limit itself into singular forms to have this experience you and I are having. And the nervous system is like the medium through which consciousness limits itself. So think about a nervous system like a funnel. A third density nervous system looks like this, and a fourth density nervous system looks like that. So you can take in more of reality, more of those higher vibrations. You can actually live in them, which is why when Kundalini finally makes its ascension to the crown chakra and stays there and doesn't go back down anymore, those people describe, you're living in bliss all the time. You're living in that awareness of oneness and love all the time.
Yeah, thank you. And love your explanation, by the way. Thank you. What I'm curious to ask you as well and unearth a little bit then, because you talk about the density and the vibration of photons and obviously the density of the light, the way I see it is like it becomes a higher frequency as well. But then we are working with our physical bodies that are hardware. And how do we then allow the adaptation to, I guess the question is, should we be looking after our bodies to support this transformation? Because the way I kind of see it, if you got hardware and the software wants to run at a greater frequency and density, but the hardware is not supporting it, then we could be in conflict here.
Oh, yes. That is one of the big components that I teach about in my program about how to facilitate this process, is that if you want to go through a Kundalini awakening, if you want to take yourself through this process or transformation, you really need to get serious about your diet and your lifestyle. Because when this energy awakens, it is a purifying fire, so to speak, that's moving through your nervous system. Shakti is the divine feminine, Kundalini. So when she comes, she doesn't play around. Like, she's there to get down to business. And when your nervous system is full of energetic blockages from like unhealed traumas, limiting beliefs, and ego identification, well, then Kundalini is probably going to put you through a pretty awful dark night for a while, because she's just going to start burning through those blockages kind of mercilessly, to be honest. She's trying to make her way up to Shiva at the third eye, her divine lover. So she's like in a rush to get there, sort of. So people often describe, right, when they have a Kundalini awakening, really what it is the term I prefer is called inner conjunction, which is that event where the energy shoots up the spine and people feel like they're being electrocuted and stuff, and they feel the ecstasy and all of that. It's an inner conjunction where the masculine and feminine energies meet perfectly at the base of the spinal nerve and then cause the energy to shoot up the sushumna, the spinal nerve, all the way to the crown. And people think that in and of itself is the totality of a Kundalini awakening, but it's just one event in a Kundalini awakening. But what it does is, after that energy comes back down to the root chakra again, which it will, all of the latent distortions in the spiritual body, the energy body, get triggered like crazy because they've just been amplified with an enormous amount of prana. And so whatever, depression, resentments, traumas that you have down there will start going haywire, and you'll start, your mind can be literally put into a state of psychosis, almost multiple personality disorder or something, because these blockages are activated in your nervous system and in your mind. So, the way I teach it is a very gradual approach to it. And it's like, let's not aim for the inner conjunction, but let's allow it to happen when the nervous system is ready for it to happen. But in the meantime, let's prepare the pathways with, deep pranayama and meditation, advanced yoga practices that purify the nervous system and open the nervous system, so that when that fourth density energy comes into activation, it doesn't set off all the trap doors and stuff, but you've actually done your work to clean those things out already. And so you can have a very blissful and euphoric inner conjunction experience, rather than one that kind of sets you off on a psychological meltdown.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's a really important point. Hey, the You spoke about symptoms as well, and I just want to touch on that. What were your symptoms at the time? Because I get people reaching out, oh, this is happening or that's happening, and what's going on here? Like, what was it for you?
Yeah, so the term that is used for the symptoms that come up when Kundalini is activated in the nervous system is Kriyas. And not to be confused with Kriya Yoga. It's the same word, but Kriya means cleansing. And so a Kundalini symptom is actually a cleansing of something. The symptom you're experiencing means that something's getting pushed out of your body or your nervous system. So in the same way that if we have like spiritual toxicity, Kundalini will make that surface. Well, same for physical toxicity. If your body is very unhealthy, you have a lot of toxicity from eating, processed foods, preservatives, heavy metals, GMOs, then those are going to get exacerbated too as those get purified out of the system. Because it's like you're moving to a higher frequency. So all the lower frequencies are getting burnt out, so to speak. So Kriya can be really almost anything. And it's very different for everybody, but there are some that are more classic and kind of hallmarked than others. For me, the one that started happening the most was the feeling of, especially when you sleep at night or if you take a nap, or even if I were just to lay down for a certain period of time, this kind of burning sensation inside of my wrists and forearms, down my legs, into my feet, sometimes up my spine, into my head and scalp, like almost like there's liquid lava moving through your veins or something. And it's actually your nadis, right? Your the energetic pathways that connect the chakra points. Kundalini is moving through your nervous system. And so wherever Kundalini moves, she feels hot like fire. But then when she leaves an area of the body, she will classically leave that area like as cold as a corpse. And that's one of the classic symptoms of an inner conjunction is the head will become extremely hot when someone's having the experience because all the energy's up there. And then the energy rushes back down to the root chakra and the whole body's really cold and shivering. And you have to warm your body back up. Same with your hands, your feet. It'll be really hot for a while and then it'll go cold once the energy leaves. And so that's why I was like, what is going on in my body? Every time I lay down, I have this burning liquid or whatever going through my body. But there's other symptoms too that people get that are very common, such as really vivid, hyper extreme dream activity, where you'll have these massively vivid lucid dreams about sometimes really graphic stuff or stuff from your past. Kundalini apparently likes to work the most when you're asleep because, when you're sleeping, Kundalini has the most resource available, the most amount of energy is available because you're not using it, right? So people will have crazy dreams, hypnagogic sensations where you'll hear things, you'll smell things, you'll taste things. And what's really interesting about Kundalini is that it has to work its way through every blockage in your mind, in your subtle body, in your causal body. And so like every single distortion, every thought, every feeling you've ever had will have to surface at some point to be seen and released out of the system. And anything from like traumas to totally random things that you never thought about since childhood. And I'll give you one like kind of funny example. I was laying in bed once and I had the burning sensation moving through my body as always. And just as I was falling asleep or maybe waking up, I smelled very powerfully the smell of something my mom used to cook when I was a kid, which was spaghetti noodles with butter and Parmesan cheese. So like spaghetti without the sauce. She used to make that meal for my sister and I all the time because we love the carby, cheesy, buttery, combination. And I had not smelled that since I was like 15 or something. And it was like, I thought my fiance was cooking it downstairs. It was filling the whole room. And I was like, wow, oh my gosh, I haven't smelled that smell in decades. And I went downstairs to see if she was cooking anything and she wasn't. And like, what is this smell? And I remembered something that Gopi Krishna said in his book, which was that he used to have, when he was going through his ascension, weird cravings would come up. One time he had a craving to cook. So he went down to the store and bought a bunch of pottery, pots and pans and cooking equipment. And he's like, I was Chef Ramsay for months. Like I was cooking these amazing meals and I wanted to cook. And then all of a sudden one day the urge just left me and I never wanted to cook ever again. And it's sort of an example of how Kundalini will bring out these vasanas, these cravings, these past addictions, whatever it might be. And it's like it surfaces and then it leaves. And it's like you have to karmically experience something to transcend it. So all kinds of weird stuff like that can happen for people. But beyond that, there's just a myriad of physical symptomology that can happen as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for sharing. You know, as we come into the end of the podcast, Aaron, and listening to you speak and cover all that, you know, what do you think ultimately we do with all this and take it into our lives? What does it mean to be human now in a world that's been turning upside down and there's this immense pressure that's forcing us to look within? How do you see the expression of the evolution of a human? Because we can get to feel so lost as well. When if you look outward, it can feel chaotic and it's like, what do I do? I feel helplessness and so forth. And we go on these journeys, we go seeking within, but we still have to show up in the world on a daily basis. And what does that human look like to you as we show up?
Yeah, that is the question. And I would go to the work of David Hawkins first. Are you familiar with David Hawkins?
I am, yeah.
Okay. So you know the map of consciousness that Dr. Hawkins teaches or taught was a scale of the level of energy that is being produced in consciousness at any given level. And what the map of consciousness showed was that the higher the level of energy consciousness produces, the more exponential its effects are in the collective. I think the word he used was logarithmic. So it's sort of like exponential. Give an example. He said that his calculations showed that a being who was vibrating at a 500 level of consciousness, which is the heart chakra level of love, they would be energetically counterbalancing 750,000 people who are below 200. So 750,000 really unconscious people produce the same level of energy in the collective as one person at a 500 level. But then at a 600 level, which is the level of inner peace or non-duality, that one person is producing the same amount of energy as 10 million people under 200. So it shows us that our spiritual growth profoundly benefits the planet. And, you know, many sages and teachers have said this. We all sort of know this to be true, that all minds are joined. We're all in this collective frequency together. And so, you know, the presence of even just a few enlightened beings on the planet can really lift the collective blanket, so to speak, quite a bit. So what I'm getting at here is that the greatest benefit that you can offer the world to help the world is your own spiritual growth. And nothing more so than making this transformation from a third density to a fourth density being in this life, where you open the heart chakra, you awaken the Kundalini, and you put out that 500 level of energy of love into the collective, so that even if you don't become a well-known healer or teacher or evangelist or whatever, sage, guru, you're still making a huge effect energetically on the planet just by your very presence here. But of course, we know that beings at that level, it's almost impossible for you not to become very influential in the world in some way, because you have such a higher level of spiritual intelligence at that level of consciousness that the amount of effect you can have is just exponential. So I always go back to this with my own students, with anybody I talk to, that yes, you know, whatever you're passionate about doing in the world is fantastic. And you do have a purpose for being here. Yes, your soul chose a reason to come here to be of service to the planet. But don't think that anything you can do, physically speaking, in the world is as beneficial as just your own spiritual growth. Because the more of us get free from these collective distortions like jealousy, resentment, anger, separation, division, you know, racism, we can go on and on. The more of us transcend those frequencies, the easier we make it for everyone else to, right? The more available it is for others to awaken. And the analogy I love is like a popcorn bowl in the microwave. As the planetary energy heats up, as we go into the fourth density, and we're seeing this right now, right? When you first start the microwave, it goes on for about a minute before the first kernel pops, and then the second one pops, and it gets pretty exponential pretty quick, right? Where the more those kernels pop, the more heat there is in the bowl, the more kernels pop. And I think we're at that point now where, yeah, things can seem dark, things can seem a bit dire at this point, but consciousness moves so fast and is moving so fast that the tipping point could happen at any moment almost, where we see the scales tip to the side of the light. And I think we are going to see that very soon, if not already, depending on your view of things, but in a very tangible way, where we will see these systems of corruption that have thrived on our planet for so long just starting to collapse because no one's feeding them anymore. I don't think we're very far away from that kind of a future.
Yeah, me too. Me too, Aaron. Wow. I feel like I could listen to you for hours, mate. You talk so well. You're extremely well researched, and you explain things very thoroughly. It's just been a pleasure having you on today, mate. What's next for you? What's next for you? What do you do? What projects you want to go? You obviously got your YouTube channel that's pretty popular on YouTube at the moment. And are you just going with the flow at the moment, or you have a bigger vision in mind? What's happening?
I'm a man on a mission right now.
I can tell.
I spent this whole year, and I'm not quite finished yet, but I'm a couple months away. I've spent this whole year building out a online academy called 4D University, which is basically an online academy for the expansion of consciousness that's dedicated to moving anyone systematically from a third density level to that fourth density level. So it's a curriculum of 3 different master classes that is about 7 or 8 months. And we kind of begin with the foundations of how to understand and master your mind, understand the ego and self-awareness. Then we move into the second program called Meditation Mastery, where we go really deep into the practice of meditation and unlocking the abilities of meditation. And then the third program is to begin facilitating a gradual Kundalini awakening through a lot of advanced yoga practices and breath work and meditation, and just the necessary teachings to understand what's going on, why am I doing these practices, and what are they doing in the body and the nervous system. So it's a really comprehensive 3-month program that kind of gives people the resources to take themselves on that journey. But really, that's what signifies you becoming a fourth density being, is that energy awakening. So it's been a really fun project, and it's been amazingly successful, more so than I even imagined. We have about 300 students right now we're just having a blast together. But I've been really dying to finish building out the curriculum so I can start writing, because writing is really my passion. So probably around January of next year, I'm finally able to start working on my first book.
Wow, amazing, mate. I can appreciate how much effort can go into creating something online as well. And what
Yes.
you're doing. Yeah, fantastic, mate. And can you just say out your URL loudly for everyone? I'll make sure it's all linked in the show notes for all the platforms where people can check you out.
Yeah, I'm basically the same everywhere. So whether it's Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, it's always /Aaron Abke, AARONABKE. AaronAbke.com. Like wherever you want to look for me, it's always the same link.
Amazing. And is there anything you'd like to leave the listeners to ponder on as we wrap it up after everything we've covered today, mate?
Sure. Yeah. Why not? What's really been alive for me lately is, looking at the dynamics that are happening in the world. And we understand, kind of the idea of projection, that if what I'm seeing happen in the world causes fear in me, or if it causes anger and judgment in me, then I have some of that energy in me that is happening out in the world. And I need to heal that part of me until what's happening in the world does not trigger me to fear or anger and judgment. And so the whole, pandemic era we've been living through has been a huge catalyst for me to see parts of myself I would have no opportunity to know existed without all of the things that have happened. And so I say, while we're in this time where, this is very unprecedented what we're watching happen to humanity, this massive awakening through some of the sort of powers of darkness that have had power on this planet for so long coming into the light, and humanity becoming aware of this power game for the first time, maybe, it sparks a lot of fear in people. And people are like, oh, I don't know what's going to happen in the future. Are we going to be taken over by these globalists and all this stuff? And I just say, man, while we're in this catalyst, make use of it, because the things that this will bring out of you, you may never have the chance to see to this magnitude again. And as we know on the spiritual path, the obstacle is the way. The greater the obstacle you transcend, the more spiritual growth you gain out of it. And so one thing that's very frequently discussed in my different groups and courses is, how do we use the world and the catalysts in the world for our own growth? And it's really just, can I see what's happening with innocence and with forgiveness? Sort of like Jesus said on the cross, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. And the way that I frame this is, whatever injustices happen that may trigger you, and you say, well, how am I supposed to be okay with that? How am I supposed to forgive that or see that as innocent? I say, ask yourself the question, would that act be possible? Would those people be able to do those things if they were fully aware of the truth of oneness and universal love, right? If they were aware of the nature of God completely, could they do those things? And the obvious answer is, of course not. They never could do those things. So those things happen in the ignorance of truth, the ignorance of God, which is how we can look at them with compassion and with forgiveness. And man, when we do that, we set ourselves free from the same energies of greediness and, power over others and whatever it might be, division. We heal ourselves from those things to the degree we can forgive them in the world. So if I'm leaving anybody with something today, I think that's probably the most relevant thing I could.
Perfect. Mate, thank you so much for coming on the show. I just appreciate everything you're putting out there into the world, mate. And you certainly, having a massive impact. And it's just been a joy to chat to you today. So thanks for everything, mate. Appreciate it.
Likewise, brother. Thank you so much for having me.